in at the time. And so, I was a teacher at Canton Elementary. I taught there for 27 years, and I knew the people that Casey wanted to be friends with. I could kind of keep tabs on who he was hanging out with and be very involved with in his life. As he got older, he went to the middle school at Twin Hawthorne Middle School in Kent County, and I didn't know as many of his friends or the parents of his friends as I had before. And I began to have this nagging feeling that something just wasn't right with Casey. It was just a gut feeling. It was my intuition. We call it a woman's intuition or a mother's intuition. I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but things just didn't seem right. I'd like for you to remember this, when you leave this place tonight. If you think that there's something wrong, there probably is, and you need to act on it now. Don't wait. So as time went on, I kept having that nagging feeling. I looked to my husband for reinforcement and asked him, but notice how I framed it, you don't think Casey is using drugs, do you? And of course he said no. We wanted to believe that. In high school, Casey went to an outside counselor, and the counselor had my husband and I come in at one of the sessions, and he said, I think Casey's the kind of kid that likes to walk on the edge, but I don't think he'll ever go over the edge. And I kind of went, well, that's a big relief. I can take a breath now. Everything's going to be all right. Because he was a professional. He had counseling certification. But it was very naive of me to think that he could give me that kind of guarantee. Again, I would say, trust your intuition. The counseling sessions ended. Casey graduated from Simon Kenton High School, and he went on to college at the University of Cincinnati. Casey never really was fond of school, but he knew that education was going to get him to where he wanted to be in life. And so he lived in our home for the first several quarters, and he was on the dean's list. And I thought, well, we've rounded the corner. We're headed for home now. Casey's going to go to college. He's going to get a good degree. He'll get a good job. He'll find someone he loves. He'll get married. He'll have children. I'll be a grandmother. I had it all planned out. But then life happened. And after Casey moved out of our house, we weren't aware so much of what was going on with him. He did come home one evening after he had moved out, and he left his backpack at our home as he went out for just a brief time. I noticed when he left that he didn't have his backpack with him, and I had thought before, if I could ever get in the backpack, I would know what was going on with Casey, because he kept that very close to him, as if it were another appendage on his body. And so that night when he left, I went in his room. In his closet, in the backpack, was a container of pot, yay tall, with marijuana buds. I brought it out, showed it to my husband, and he said, yep, that's what it is. He took it from me, and just like that, he took it downstairs and burned it up in a fireplace. We missed an opportunity that night to intervene on Casey. If I had that night to live over, I would have put that marijuana back, waited till Casey got home, called the police, and had him arrested. I didn't. I let fear rule my decisions a lot, and that night I let fear rule my decision, and I regret that. I do want to say, though, right now, that I know, without a doubt, that addiction is a disease, not a crime. And unfortunately, we have had to use our criminal justice system as an intervention for people who are addicted. But as you heard the officer say, incarceration is not treatment. That is not what a person who is addicted needs. And so we missed that opportunity with Casey. But there would be another opportunity that I also missed. Casey came home that night, and he said to me, you don't know what you've done. I didn't really realize what I had done. Later it would dawn on me that Casey owed some major money to someone for that stash that was now burned in the fireplace. I don't know how he dealt with that. I just know we did not finance it. And so that was in November then. He came home for Thanksgiving, and he said, I guess you know I'm moving home. The people I'm living with have gotten on my last nerve, because by this time Casey had moved out of the house. And I said to him, not without a job you're not, because I had decided that tough love was in order. I had tried to counsel Casey. In fact, he said, Mom, every time I'm here it's like a counseling session. I don't have a problem. If you want me to get one, I will. Will that make you happy? And I said, no, Casey, that won't make me happy. And so there was no doubt now that Casey was using and selling to support his use. December the 1st is Casey's birthday. He would soon be 35 years old. On his birthday, we were with him at Brookwood and Max and Irma's, and we were going to have lunch that day. When he came in, I looked at him and I said, what's the matter, Case? Because again, I'm a mom, and moms know things. Trust yourself. I'll say it again. Trust yourself. He said nothing. I'm just tired. But when we sat down to eat that day, he almost fell asleep in his plate. And I thought, what I'm looking at is not just tired. There's something more going on. And so when we left the restaurant that day, I said something very intelligent. I know you'll be impressed. I said, Casey, you should not be driving. I missed another opportunity to intervene on Casey. So after that, on Christmas Day night, Casey was at our home, and he said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I like to do to have fun anymore. I don't know. What he was telling me was that heroin had taken the spirit of who he was. I said, Casey, it took Casey's brain first, and Dr. Kalfas will talk more about that. It took the spirit of who he was, and then it took his life. And it didn't stop until it took it all. That is the horror of heroin. So Casey left that night, but before he left, he said, I said to him, I said, Casey, I'm here when you're ready. I love you, and I'm here. Because you see, I had been being told that Casey had to want to, loosen up, and hit bottom. And I believe those things because the professionals were telling me so. I know now that those are myths. We cannot afford to wait until someone wants to, loosens enough, and hits bottom. I can tell you, as Rich did tonight, there is no body that wants to be addicted. No body. And everybody that gets involved with this loses more than enough. More than enough. And what is hitting bottom? You know, it never made sense to me that we let people go all the way down and then try to resurrect them. Doesn't it make more sense to intervene? It does to me. Casey overdosed not once, not twice, but 3 times. The first 2 times he would say, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm sorry, Dad, I know I'm a big disappointment to you. And we would always say to him, no, you're not, Casey. We just want you to be happy. But you see, we didn't understand he'd lost the ability to be happy. And so, on the first overdose, he was taken to the hospital, St. E. North at that time, and he was on a respirator. When we got to the hospital, he was taken off. We were out of town at the time. And so, as we walked down the hall, he said, Mom, I have a love affair with heroin. I had no clue what that meant. But I can tell you, in talking to people who are addicted, the guys that are in the building where my office is, I've heard so many of them say, it became my new girlfriend. And so the second overdose came. And the second overdose was after he had been off of anything for about 20 days. He said later, "Mom, I used to celebrate not using. How crazy is that?" I said, "Casey, I wanted you to get arrested. How crazy is that?" You see, heroin takes you to places that you never thought that you would go. I said, "Casey, you were always so afraid of needles." He said, "Mom, I'm doing things I said I'd never do." The third overdose, Casey was at University Hospital, 2002. He was one of those 5,000. He was in a coma. So he couldn't tell us that he was sorry, that he had disappointed us. He wasn't talking that time. And it was only at that point in time that we, as his parents who loved and cared about him dearly, were allowed to intervene on our son. We could decide for a feeding tube. We could decide for a cage in his lung to capture any blood clots that might develop. And then we had the ultimate decision of turning off the life support after him being in a coma for 10 days. That is a decision that no parent wants to have to make. Holly and Eric had to make that same decision. When Casey died, we wanted to donate his organs. We were not allowed to because he had been an IV drug user. I thought that, that would be one way that Casey could live on. But actually God had a much bigger plan for Casey and for me. Because I can tell you that I never thought about being a recovery advocate. That was not in my plan, any more than Casey being addicted was in his plan. But that's what life has dealt me, and I am very grateful to be able to do what I do. After Casey passed away, I called the courthouse. Casey did manage to get arrested one time in Indiana, and they released him on his own recognizance with the warning that he might receive a summons in 90 days to appear in court to face charges. He got that summons. Unfortunately, it was the day of his funeral. The mail carrier came to our door with a registered letter saying that he should appear in court. After I had sense enough to make a phone call, which took a while, I called the courthouse and I asked about information on where I could send a letter to the judge and tell him that I hoped that the next time that he had the ability to intervene on someone that he would use it. I sent him a picture of Casey. I wanted to send him a picture. And so I was trying to get that information of where to send it to. The person that answered the phone said to me, when I told her who I was calling in regard to, she said, "Well, we have a warrant out for his arrest." I said, "Well, good luck. He's buried at Spring Grove Cemetery." And I told her what I had wanted the judge to do that day when he had Casey in front of him. And she said, "Well, you don't understand how the system works." And I said, "Well, if that's how the system works, there's something wrong with the system." I said, "I don't know if that was my epiphany or not, but I do know that it was after that I was a mom on a mission." I said, "I was like a loose cannon shooting off in all directions, hoping I would hit something, not knowing what in the world I was doing. I just knew I had to do something. I knew I had to do something to make sense of Casey's death. I knew I had to do something to make a difference for other families, because I knew there were going to be more that were going to come after Casey. I knew that 11 years ago. I went to my legislator, Representative Tom Kerr, and he introduced legislation in 2003. Now, Casey died in August. By January, I was in Frankfurt trying to get a bill passed that would allow parents, relatives, and or friends to petition the court on behalf of their loved one, regardless of age and without criminal charges. We didn't get it done the first legislative session, but we did the second. And since 2004, July the 13th, we have had a law in the state of Kentucky that allows parents, relatives, and/or friends to petition the court on behalf of someone who has a substance use disorder, regardless of age and without any criminal charges. It's known as the Matthew Casey Wethington Act for Substance Abuse Intervention. Since Casey's death and since the passage of Casey's law, I have been a recovery advocate for transition since 2005. I'm very grateful to be able to work for an agency that has a continuum of care that starts with non-medical detox and takes the person all the way through into transitional housing, permanent housing. But we have a whole continuum of care, a spectrum of care that I'll be glad to talk with you about later when there's brochures out on the table about that and about Casey's Law and about our Peace Grief Support Group as well. I know that Holly told me one day, she said, Charlotte, I don't want to be on the other side of the table. But I'm so glad that we've been at the table for Holly and for other people who have lost loved ones to addiction. I'm very honored tonight to be the bearer of Casey's light so that others' lights